Good evening and welcome. Tonight, we explore the convergence of history and the future, a new era of intelligence.
So what if the biggest obstacle to your understanding of the world is actually the very language you use to describe it? I want you to really just sit with that for a second.
It's a pretty heavy thought right out of the gate.
Right. Because usually, when we think about gaining knowledge, we imagine acquiring new words, right? Like new concepts, new mental models.
Yeah, exactly.
We kind of picture ourselves building this house of intellect, like brick by brick. But what if the bricks themselves are defective? What if the labels you put on things, the very words you're thinking in, have actually trapped your mind in a cage you can't even see?
It is deeply unsettling, honestly, because we completely rely on language to navigate reality. I mean, from the moment we're born, we're basically handed a dictionary by our culture, right?
Yeah, prepackaged dictionary.
Exactly. And we just assume those words are perfect mirrors reflecting the objective truth out there in the world. But when you start to actually pull at the linguistic threads of how we construct human knowledge, that mirror kind of shatters.
It totally shatters.
You realize you aren't really looking at reality. You're looking at a painting of reality that someone else drew, centuries ago.
And we just blindly accepted the painting. We never questioned it. And that realization is really the bedrock of what we are doing today in this deep dive.
Right.
We are pulling from this incredible analytical text called The Journey of the Mind to Certainty. And let me tell you, the author's mission is just audacious.
Oh, absolutely.
The premise is basically that humanity is suffering from a terminal cognitive disease. And the text actually diagnoses this as bottle sickness.
Bottle sickness, yeah.
Yeah.
It is a chillingly accurate description of, our modern intellectual landscape. Because we are drowning in information, right?
Oh, 24/7.
But we are starving for actual clarity because we're all sick with this underlying condition.
And the cure isn't just, reading more books or watching more documentaries. Like, the cure requires us to strip absolutely everything down to the studs.
Yeah, a complete teardown.
Right. We are not going to look at existence or philosophy or the universe through the lens of tradition today. We aren't relying on blind faith, and we certainly aren't relying on inherited dogmas. We're going to start with pure, unadulterated reason.
Which is really hard to do.
It is. But we're going to build a strict, unforgiving set of logical criteria from absolute scratch. And then we're going to do something that, honestly, might make some people uncomfortable. We are going to rigorously stress test humanity's most influential texts against those rules.
Which definitely necessitates setting some firm ground rules before we take another step here.
Yes, please.
Because the source material we are auditing today, it tackles texts that have shaped the geopolitical and spiritual landscape of the entire planet for millennia. Specifically, the author analyzes the Torah, the Gospels, and the Quran.
And look, if you're listening to this right now, maybe your guard just went up.
Naturally.
Maybe you're thinking, oh, great, here we go, another religious debate. Let me just stop you right there. Our goal today is absolutely not to take sides.
Not at all.
We are not theologians trying to convert you. We aren't atheists trying to tear down your faith. We are acting strictly as your analytical guides today. We're putting on our auditor hats, we're picking up a clipboard, and we're impartially reporting on the rigorous methodology and the textual evidence provided in this specific source material. Nothing more, nothing less.
And the value here, I think, for anyone trying to navigate the modern world is the methodology itself. We live in an era of absolute information overload,
Right. Everyone has a megaphone.
Exactly. Everyone from politicians to internet influencers is just screaming their ultimate truth at you through a screen. And because of all that noise, we often just inherit our certainties without ever actually inspecting the foundational pillars holding them up.
We just take them for granted.
Right. So this discussion is going to hand you a golden methodology to aggressively audit your own worldview.
So let's get right into the clinic and diagnose this bottle sickness. Because, if we don't understand the disease, the cure isn't going to make any sense.
Right, the diagnosis comes first.
So the author uses this brilliant metaphor of the bottle, or in the original Arabic, al-Qarura. Imagine early humans encounter this raw, wild concept out in the universe, right? A feeling, a natural phenomenon, a social dynamic.
Yeah.
Because we are social creatures who need to coordinate, we can't just grunt at the raw concept. We have to capture it. So we pour that raw reality into a linguistic bottle and we slap a written label on it.
It's purely a survival mechanism. A society cannot function, hunt, build, or govern without a shared linguistic architecture. You have to, put the water in a bottle to pass it to someone else.
Exactly. But then the tragedy of human history kind of kicks in. Because over decades and centuries, we become entirely obsessed with the label.
You forget the
We totally forget the water. We start forming factions. We argue violently about the shape of the bottle, the color of the glass, the specific font on the label. And in all that chaos, we completely lose contact with the actual reality the word was originally pointing to.
And the text provides this surgical breakdown of how this actually happens, because it isn't an overnight shift. It's a 4-stage process of what we might call concept freezing. It maps out the exact life cycle of how a simple, useful word morphs into a dogmatic prison.
And I found this progression so fascinating because you can literally see it happening in real time on the news today.
Yeah.
The first stage is pretty innocent, though, right? The author calls it coining.
Yes. Coining is the pragmatic dawn of a word. A community observes a phenomenon and collectively agrees on a vocal sound to represent it. And at this moment, everyone involved is fully aware that the name is just a convenient tool. It's an arbitrary social contract.
Like a group of ancient people pointing at the giant burning ball of gas in the sky and saying, look, we need to know when to wake up. Let's just call that thing the sun.
Right.
Everyone knows the burning ball isn't literally made of the letters S-U-N.
Exactly that. But the innocence doesn't last. Stage 2 creeps in, which is epistemological forgetting.
That sounds intense. What is that?
Well, as the original generation dies off and new generations are born, children are just handed the word as a prepackaged reality. They never witness the coining process.
Right. They just inherit the bottle.
Yeah, so the collective memory that this word was just a human invention fades away entirely. The question of why did we call it that just evaporates from the culture.
So the word just is the thing. The label fully fuses to the object in their minds.
Which triggers stage 3, a really critical philosophical trap known as reification. This is where the sickness takes root.
Reification.
Yeah. Reification is the cognitive error of treating an abstract concept, or like a mere linguistic signpost, as if it were a concrete, independent, physical reality. The human mind begins to treat the label as the very essence, the DNA of the thing itself.
Okay, I have a perfect, actually pretty embarrassing personal example of this.
Oh, please share.
A few years ago at a family Thanksgiving dinner, this massive argument broke out over the word socialism.
Oh, boy. A classic.
Voices were raised. People were literally slamming the table. Half the table was using the word to mean Stalin's gulags and the total collapse of the economy. The other half was using the word to mean fire departments and public libraries.
Right. Totally different concepts.
We argued for 2 hours about the label, completely blind to the fact that we were talking about entirely different liquids inside the bottle. We had reified the word into a monster or a savior, forgetting it was just a clunky 19th century economic term.
That Thanksgiving argument is the textbook definition of stage 4, which is sanctification.
Sanctification.
Yes. The label transcends being a mere descriptor and becomes an untouchable heritage. It becomes an identity marker. To question the boundaries of the word or to suggest we pour the water into a new bottle is treated as heresy. The word becomes a sacred idol that literally demands defense.
And the text points out that this isn't just a political or religious failing. It happens in the hard sciences too, which blew my mind.
Oh, absolutely.
I loved the example of the word atom. The ancient Greeks forged that bottle. Atomos literally translates to indivisible. That was their container for matter. They believed they had conceptualized the smallest uncuttable unit of the universe.
Right. But then the 20th century arrives and physicists literally split it open. They discover protons, neutrons, and eventually quarks and gluons.
But we kept the bottle. The literal definition of the word inherently contains a scientifically false concept now, but we are so mentally captive to the label that we still just call it an atom.
It's just easier to keep the label.
Exactly. Or look at the concept of democracy. When the Athenians poured that bottle, the liquid inside specifically meant the rule of free, native-born, property-owning males. It explicitly excluded women and enslaved people.
A very specific, limited liquid.
Today, if you say democracy, the liquid in your mind is universal suffrage and equal human rights. But because everyone is clutching the same antique bottle, dictatorships can hold sham elections and confidently claim, we are a democracy too.
because they are exploiting the sanctification of the label. And this linguistic captivity naturally introduces a secondary, even more profound trap discussed in the text, which is the captivity of tools.
Right.
Our linguistic cages are basically reinforced by our physical and technological cages. The author presents this brilliant thought experiment to illustrate this, called the table of objects.
Let's walk into that room.
Right.
So imagine a perfectly normal dining table. It has a ceramic coffee cup sitting on it.
Okay. If you approach that table and rely solely on your biological tool, which is the naked eye, you perceive a smooth wooden surface and a solid, unbroken white cup. Within the limits of that tool, that observation is your absolute, unquestionable truth.
But then I hand you a powerful magnifying glass. You lean in. Suddenly, your absolute truth is completely shattered. The wood is actually this jagged landscape of deep canyons and scratches. There are microscopic dust mites crawling all over it. The ceramic cup is covered in hairline fractures.
Right.
The reality of the table sitting in the room didn't change for a single second. But your tool dictated a completely different version of truth.
Now escalate the tool. Wheel an electron microscope into the room and focus it on the table.
The table vanishes. It literally stops being a solid object entirely. Through that lens, it is revealed as this vast, terrifyingly empty space, sparsely populated by vibrating atomic structures and swirling probability clouds. It's mostly nothingness.
Yes.
Now, if you are driving right now, think about the implication of this. Did the electron microscope finally show us the ultimate truth of the table?
Well, human arrogance always assumes the answer is yes. Every time we invent a new piece of technology, we plant a flag and declare, we have finally pierced the veil, we see the bottom of reality. But the source argues this is the trap of the temporary absolute.
The microscope didn't free us from illusion. It just transferred us into a smaller, higher-resolution prison cell. We are now captive to the ceiling of the electron microscope's capabilities. What happens in 100 years when someone invents a quantum string visualizer?
The truth is constantly outrunning our tools.
Exactly. And this technological captivity doesn't just limit our vision. It infects our fundamental metaphors for existence. The text details a fascinating phenomenon we could call the tech illusion. We constantly use the pinnacle of our current technology to explain human consciousness and the universe.
Like the clockwork universe. During the scientific revolution, the 17th and 18th centuries, the most breathtaking piece of technology a human could witness was a complex mechanical clock. So, brilliant minds like Newton conceptualized the entire cosmos as a giant ticking mechanism, wound up by a divine watchmaker. They thought of the human body as a series of levers, pumps, and pulleys.
But then the electrical age sparks to life. Telegraphs, light bulbs, power grids. Almost overnight, the mechanical metaphor is totally discarded. The brain is no longer a clock, it is a switchboard. Nerves are no longer strings, they are electrical circuits relaying currents.
And think about how we talk today. Our ultimate tool is the computer. So how do we describe ourselves? We say our brains are processing data. We talk about hardwiring habits.
Oh my gosh, yes. When I'm exhausted, my kids literally tell me my brain is buffering.
Perfect example.
We have prominent scientists seriously arguing that the entire universe is a computer simulation. We are perpetually trapping our existential identity inside the metaphor of whatever shiny gadget we just patented.
We assume our modern tech metaphors are objective reality, completely blind to the fact that we are just staring at the curvature of our own historical bottle.
Okay, I have to step in and play devil's advocate here, because this can induce a lot of existential vertigo.
I can imagine, yeah.
If every word I speak is a frozen, inaccurate concept, and every tool I use, from my eyeballs to my iPhone, is just a distorting lens, aren't we just hopelessly trapped in the dark?
It feels like it.
If my language is a cage and my science is a cage, how can I trust anything? Shouldn't we just throw our hands up and embrace complete nihilism?
That is exactly the precipice this theory brings you to, and it is a vital philosophical crisis to experience. If the map is fundamentally not the territory, how do we ever take a confident step on the actual ground?
Right.
Well, the source material does not leave us in that void. It aggressively rejects absolute skepticism. It argues that yes, an objective, absolute truth exists independently of our perception, even if our tools render it blurry. The solution isn't to smash the bottles and let the water spill into the dirt. You need bottles to survive the desert.
You still have to communicate. You still have to do science.
Exactly. The resolution offered is a cognitive posture called critical humility. We cannot escape the bottles, but we can achieve liberation by simply being aware of them. The text introduces an essential grounding principle captured in the Arabic phrase alathwiya, which translates to "the word is a vessel."
The word is a vessel. Explain how that functions in practice.
It means engaging in constant conscious deconstruction. When you use a word, you must maintain a dual awareness. You recognize that the word has a solid core, like a basic dictionary definition that prevents it from meaning just anything, but you also recognize that it is a hollow vessel. The final living truth of the word is the liquid poured into it by context. The context of the speaker's intent, the historical moment, the surrounding sentences. If you strip away context and just violently defend the empty glass vessel, you fall into dogma.
So we use the tools, but we refuse to worship them.
Precisely.
I can use the word atom to pass a chemistry test, while simultaneously holding the quiet knowledge that the word itself is a historical lie.
Yes.
There's a massive paradigm shift.
Yeah.
But it leads us directly to the next monumental hurdle in our deep dive. If our language is compromised, and our inherited traditions are mostly just sanctified bottles of ancient politics, where on earth do we start looking for actual existential truth?
Right.
If someone wants to know if there's a creator or why we exist, what is the uncorrupted ground zero?
The author posits that there is only one uncorrupted starting line available to the human mind: pure reason.
Just reason.
The abstract, calculating, logical intellect. Not a sacred scroll, not a charismatic guru, and not a warm feeling in your chest. Just cold, structural logic.
Which, I mean, that is going to irritate a lot of people.
Oh, for sure.
For many, approaching the concept of a creator or meaning with cold logic feels offensive. They feel faith should be the starting point, or at least spiritual intuition. Why does the text insist on pure reason?
The text provides a devastating historical and practical argument for this. Starting with sacred authority inevitably traps humanity in an unresolvable dead end of competing absolutes. Imagine a scenario. A devout Muslim approaches with the Quran, a devout Christian arrives with the Bible, and a materialist scientist arrives with a peer-reviewed paper on quantum fluctuations.
They are essentially standing on 3 different planets.
Exactly. They share no foundational premise. They cannot even engage in a coherent debate because each one's ultimate authority is considered completely invalid by the other two. You just end up shouting your book at their book.
Doubting past each other.
Yeah. And the author highlights the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD as the ultimate historical proof of this failure.
Oh, this is a brilliant historical parallel. Break down what happened at Nicaea.
You had hundreds of Christian bishops assembled by the Roman emperor to resolve a massive theological crisis regarding the exact specific nature of Jesus. Was he a creation of God or co-eternal with God?
Right.
But they did not possess a neutral, rational standard to measure their arguments against. Faction A quoted one set of letters from early church fathers. Faction B quoted a different set of regional traditions.
They were just hurling different sanctified bottles at each other's heads.
Precisely. And because you cannot logically solve an equation when every mathematician is using a different set of numbers, how did the council resolve the nature of the divine? They didn't resolve it through a breakthrough in pure logic. They resolved it with a political vote.
Wow.
They tallied hands, codified a creed, and the emperor literally exiled the losers. That is the inevitable, tragic result of lacking a shared, neutral arbiter. You do not discover truth. You simply enforce the will of the majority through power.
This perfectly tees up an analogy from the text that I think every listener needs to internalize. He also calls it the thermometer analogy.
Yes, I love this one.
The question is posed: why has human philosophy essentially failed to arrive at a consensus on the big questions after 10,000 years of trying? From Aristotle to Nietzsche to modern existentialists, we have brilliant, breathtaking systems of thought, but no unified answer. Was Kant just not smart enough?
Their intelligence was staggering. The failure wasn't brain power.
The failure was the lack of a standardized measurement tool. The author equates the history of philosophy to locking 100 of the world's most brilliant doctors in a hospital ward with a dying patient, but refusing to give them a thermometer, an MRI machine, or a blood panel. What is the inevitable result?
Absolute chaos. One genius doctor examines the patient and declares, based on my medical intuition, it's a severe fever. Another brilliant doctor feels the pulse and says, no, it's clearly an imbalance of the bodily humors. A third argues it's a psychosomatic manifestation of trauma.
They're all guessing. Because without a thermometer, an external, neutral, universally agreed-upon standard of measurement, they are forced to project their own internal, subjective paradigms onto the patient. Philosophy has spent millennia trying to diagnose the universe without a thermometer.
Therefore, the mandate of the text is clear. Before we are allowed to open a single religious book, we must build our thermometer.
Right.
We have to forge an ironclad set of logical criteria that any entity claiming to be the ultimate truth or the creator must pass. And this construction project begins with the most universally accepted logical necessity, which is the concept of the first cause.
Let's lay the concrete for this foundation. The logic flows like this. The universe we observe is clearly not eternal. It is subject to entropy, it degrades, it is in a state of constant change, and physics points to a definitive beginning.
Yes, the Big Bang.
Right. Human beings are also contingent. We don't exist necessarily. We depend on a million external factors, oxygen, gravity, our parents, just to exist for a single second. Because everything is a dependent effect, reason dictates there must be a starting domino, an uncaused first cause that initiated the chain.
And here's where the text performs its heavy lifting. By analyzing the sheer logical necessity of what an uncaused first cause must be, the author derives 7 absolute, non-negotiable attributes. The text argues that a creator must possess these traits not because a prophet said so, but because the mathematical laws of logic demand it. If an entity is missing even one of these traits, it logically cannot be the first cause of the universe.
This is our thermometer. Let's build it out rule by rule. What is the first attribute on the list?
Criterion number 1 is absolute perfection. The first cause must be entirely devoid of flaws, completely unchanging, incapable of regret, and immune to death.
Why unchanging?
Because any flaw or any transition from one emotional or physical state to another implies a state of lack. It implies potential that hasn't been realized. Furthermore, change requires time, and it requires an external force to cause that change. The uncaused cause must be complete within itself.
Let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. If I have a piece of software and it needs an update, it means the first version was flawed, or the environment changed and the software had to adapt. The first cause can't have a version 2.0 because that would mean something outside of it forced it to improve.
A perfect analogy. Adaptation is a sign of vulnerability and contingency. The first cause does not adapt.
Okay, criterion number 2, absolute oneness. Now, humanity has a long history of polytheism. Why does pure logic demand only one creator? The text uses the 2 captains analogy here, which I found deeply compelling.
Yeah, imagine a massive, complex ocean liner. Now imagine placing 2 captains on the bridge and granting both of them absolute infinite authority over the ship. What happens?
Chaos.
If they disagree on the heading, one of 2 things occurs. Either Captain A overpowers Captain B, which instantly proves Captain B is not all-powerful and therefore not God. Or they clash equally, and the ship is literally torn to pieces by contradictory commands.
Like trying to steer left and right simultaneously.
Yes. When we observe the universe, from the orbit of galaxies down to the strong nuclear force binding atoms, we see staggering, unified order. The laws of physics do not contradict each other depending on what galaxy you are in. That unbroken systemic order implies a single architect. Furthermore, if you posit 2 infinite gods, how do you tell them apart?
Right, you'd need a boundary.
Exactly. They would require distinguishing boundaries to be separate entities, but you cannot place boundaries on the infinite. Logic simply does not allow for multiple uncaused causes.
Criterion number 3 is self-sufficiency.
The creator cannot need anything. Need is the ultimate hallmark of the created, not the creator. The first cause cannot require food, it cannot require a physical location to rest, and crucially, it cannot require the worship, praise, or sacrifices of human beings.
Because that would make it dependent.
Right. An entity that needs you to sing to it to validate its ego is dependent on your voice. A dependent being is, by definition, not the ultimate foundation of reality.
This connects directly to criterion number 4, which is a massive stumbling block for many traditions, transcendence from matter.
The first cause must exist completely outside the dimensions of space and time. Space, time, and physical matter are properties of the created universe. They are the dimensions of the box. You logically cannot be trapped inside the very box you built.
The analogy I always think of here is a video game programmer.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right. A programmer sitting in an office in Seattle writes the code for a vast digital world. The programmer is the creator of that world. But the programmer is not made of pixels. He doesn't live inside the server. The painter cannot be physically trapped beneath the layers of oil paint on their own canvas. If a religion points to a physical object or a human body or a statue and says, "This is the creator," they have logically failed the transcendence test.
Exactly. The carpenter is not made of wood. Criterion number 5 is absolute wisdom.
What does wisdom mean in this strictly logical sense?
It means intentionality. Nothing is created in vain or as an absurd accident. When you observe the extreme microscopic complexity of a single biological cell, or the razor-edge fine-tuning of the cosmological constant that allows stars to form, it screams purposeful design.
It's the classic watchmaker argument. If I'm walking on a deserted beach and I find a Rolex half buried in the sand, I don't assume the ocean waves randomly bash some rocks together over millions of years to create the gears in the glass face. My mind instantly deduces a watchmaker.
And crucially, a watchmaker has a purpose for the watch. It is built to tell time. An absolutely perfect creator does not engage in random, purposeless, or absurd actions. Everything from a mosquito to a supernova possesses a why.
Criterion number 6 is absolute justice. Now, looking at the suffering in the world, this is a tough one. How is it a logical necessity?
The text argues that injustice is fundamentally a defect. Think about why humans act unjustly. We are unjust because we are ignorant of the truth, or we are afraid of losing power, or we need to hoard resources, or we give arbitrary favoritism to our tribe.
All human limitations.
Exactly. But we've already established that the first cause is perfect, self-sufficient, and all-knowing. Therefore, the creator has zero logical motivation for injustice. The first cause fears nothing, needs nothing, and knows everything. Injustice is impossible. There can be no arbitrary favoritism, and it logically forbids punishing an innocent person for the crimes of the guilty.
And rounding out the thermometer, criterion number 7, absolute knowledge.
Total, unhindered, infinite awareness of all things. Past, present, future, the hidden quantum realm, and the manifest galaxies. Logically, you cannot perfectly design, orchestrate, and sustain a complex universe if you are blind to any aspect of its functioning. Ignorance is a void, and the first cause contains no voids.
If you are listening to this right now, I want to emphasize why the methodology we just walked through is completely revolutionary. Take a step back and look at how theological debates usually happen. A person opens their specific holy book, points to a verse, and declares, "This book is sacred. Therefore, this verse is the unquestionable truth." Now, I am going to bend my brain, ignore physics, and twist my logic into a pretzel to make the real world fit what this ancient text says.
It is entirely backward. It is putting the cart before the horse.
Completely backward. What the author of this source demands is the exact opposite trajectory. We are saying, here is the cold, hard logic. Here are the 7 unbreakable mathematical rules of what a creator must be. Now let's haul these ancient books into the light and see which one actually survives the stress test. We aren't bending the thermometer to make the sick patient feel better. We are ruthlessly measuring the patient with the thermometer.
And that pivot leads us directly into the existential audit. This is where the methodology stops being abstract and gets deeply practical. We are going to take this thermometer, these 7 non-negotiable criteria of perfection, oneness, self-sufficiency, transcendence, wisdom, justice, and knowledge, and we are going to apply them to the 3 major texts analyzed in the source: the Torah, the Gospels, and the Quran.
Again, maintaining our strict neutrality, we are intellectual auditors relying solely on the textual evidence compiled by the author of our source. Let's start with the oldest text on the docket, the Torah, specifically the first 5 books of Moses as they are compiled and read today. How does the source evaluate the Torah against the thermometer?
Based on the methodology, the text analysis concludes that the Torah achieves roughly a 40 to 50% alignment with the logical criteria.
Okay, so it's a mixed result. Let's break down the grading. Where does it pass the test?
It passes brilliantly in its foundational establishment of strict monotheism. The central declaration of the text, the Shema, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," aligns flawlessly with the criterion of absolute oneness. It effectively banishes the pantheons of polytheism. It also establishes a strong baseline for divine knowledge and ultimate justice in many of its legal codes.
But to hit 40–50%, there must be severe logical violations. Where does the Torah fail the rational audit?
The most glaring failure, according to the source, is on the criterion of transcendence. The text points out numerous verses where the creator is brought down into the physical realm and depicted in highly anthropomorphic human terms.
Like what?
For example, in Genesis, God is described as literally walking in the Garden of Eden in the cool of the day, to the point where Adam and Eve can actually hear his footsteps. He is described as physically descending onto Mount Sinai, requiring Moses to hide in a cleft of rock. In Exodus, he is called a man of war.
It's the painter getting trapped in the painting. Rationally, the uncaused cause of space and time cannot be localized, taking a stroll under a tree.
Exactly. The infinite cannot be constrained by geography. The text also highlights a profound failure regarding the criterion of perfection. The source points to verses, particularly before the flood narrative, where God is described as regretting that he made humanity and being grieved in his heart.
Let's apply pure logic to the concept of regret. You only experience regret under two conditions. Either the outcome of an event surprised you, meaning you didn't see it coming, which violates absolute knowledge, or you realize you made a poor decision that needs fixing, which violates absolute perfection.
Precisely. Regret is an emotion born of limitation. An all-knowing, perfect being cannot experience it. Furthermore, the source notes issues with self-sufficiency, pointing to the heavy, almost transactional emphasis on the pleasing aroma of burnt sacrifices, as if the Creator physically required appeasement. While later prophets push back against this, the presence of these physical and emotional limitations in the foundational text drops its logical score significantly.
Let's move to the second major text. Can you unpack the text's analysis of the four canonical Gospels of the New Testament? How do they fare when measured by the thermometer?
Subjecting the Gospels to the same strict criteria, the source calculates a lower score, estimating a 20 to 30% logical match.
Now, I can hear a lot of people objecting to that low score immediately.
Oh, inevitably.
The Gospels are globally revered for containing some of the highest moral philosophy ever recorded. The Sermon on the Mount, turning the other cheek, caring for the marginalized.
And the source completely acknowledges the profound moral and ethical teachings contained within those texts. But we must remain focused on the specific parameters of our audit. We are not grading ethical philosophy. We are grading the theological depiction of the first cause against strict logical bounds. And on that specific front, the source argues the Gospels collapse under the weight of severe logical contradictions across multiple categories.
Let's walk through those contradictions.
First, the bedrock criterion of absolute oneness is compromised by the theological framework of the Trinity that emerges from the texts. Commands to baptize in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. As we established with the two captains analogy, true absolute oneness cannot abide multiplicity, division of essence, or distinct persons operating within a Godhead.
It introduces boundaries within the infinite.
Yeah.
What about transcendence?
Transcendence is entirely shattered by the core narrative of the Incarnation. The texts assert that the Creator of the cosmos became a physical man of flesh and blood, was born of a woman, required daily sustenance, slept when exhausted, and was subjected to the physical limits of gravity and pain.
Right.
The uncaused cause is depicted as a contingent being dependent on oxygen and food.
Which cascades directly into a massive violation of perfection.
Yes. The entire narrative culmination of the Gospels is that the Creator, or a core aspect of the Creator, suffered excruciating physical torture and ultimately died on a Roman cross. Applying our logical rules, death is the ultimate negation of existence. The uncaused cause, the very source of all life and reality, logically cannot cease to live, even temporarily. It is an oxymoron. Furthermore, the text points out internal violations of absolute knowledge, such as the Son explicitly stating he does not know the hour of the end times, only the Father knows.
If one part of the divine essence is ignorant of a fact, absolute knowledge is voided. But what about the criterion of justice?
The source argues that the foundational theology required to make the gospel narrative work, the idea of original sin inherited genetically from Adam, combined with the necessity of an innocent figure being violently punished to pay the moral debt for the guilty, is a profound violation of absolute justice. Rationally, perfect justice dictates that individuals are solely responsible for their own agency. Punishing the innocent to spare the guilty might sound like an act of love, but logically it is the definition of a miscarriage of justice.
So the Torah scores roughly half, because it struggles with anthropomorphism and divine regret. The Gospels score lower, because the core narrative of incarnation, death, and vicarious atonement shatters the logical bounds of perfection, transcendence, and justice. Now we turn the thermometer to the final text analyzed in the source, the Quran. What is the evaluation here?
The source presents a meticulous evaluation of the Quran, calculating an exceptionally high score of a 92 to 97% match with the rational criteria.
That is a massive leap from the other two. How does the text justify such a high correlation with pure reason?
The argument presented is that the Quran maintains a strict, uncompromising, almost relentless adherence to all 7 criteria throughout its entirety. Its declaration of oneness is absolute and indivisible. Say, He is God the One. Its transcendence is total. There is nothing like unto him.
Wow.
It explicitly and repeatedly denies that the Creator rests, sleeps, forgets, repents, or possesses any physical form or dimensions. It asserts total self-sufficiency, famously declaring that God is free of need, while the entire universe is in desperate need of him.
How does it handle the justice problem we saw in the Gospels?
It explicitly dismantles the concept of inherited guilt, stating clearly, no bearer of burdens will bear the burden of another. It asserts that the Creator does not wrong anyone by even the weight of a single atom.
Hang on, I need to interrupt and push back right
Oh,
here.
you do?
You just said it passed on perfection and justice. But if someone goes to a bookstore, buys an English translation of the Quran, and starts reading, they're going to hit verses that talk about God's wrath. They're going to read verses where God is plotting against the unbelievers. Wrath is anger. Anger is an emotional reaction to losing control. Plotting implies sneakiness and deceit. Doesn't that immediately break the perfection rule we just established?
This is a brilliant pushback, and it is exactly why the author laid the groundwork of the bottle theory back in the beginning. The source anticipates this exact critique and meticulously dismantles it using the rule of the word as a vessel. If you, a 21st century English speaker, read the word wrath and pour your human context into it, meaning you picture a deity losing his temper, getting red in the face, and acting out of impulsive rage, then yes, you have just imagined a logical contradiction.
Because human anger implies a lack of emotional control.
Precisely. But the source argues that to read the text accurately, you must read the word within the text's own established linguistic ecosystem. Because the text has already aggressively established the absolute unchangeable perfection of the Creator, explicitly stating nothing is like unto him. The word wrath logically cannot mean an emotional human tantrum.
So we have the glass bottle labeled wrath. What is the actual liquid inside it in this context?
In the Quranic context, wrath is the enactment of absolute justice. It is the deliberate, calculated, and perfectly just consequence applied to severe oppression, arrogance, or persistent evil. It is the friction that occurs when human malice collides with the immovable wall of divine justice. It contains no emotion. It is pure, absolute consequence.
And what about the concept of God plotting? That sounds deceptive.
The same principle applies. The Arabic word used is makr, which translators often lazily render as plotting or scheming. But when applied to the first cause, it does not mean malicious trickery, it means outmaneuvering.
Outmaneuvering.
Right. When oppressors secretly plan to harm the innocent or bury the truth, the divine plot is the subtle, overarching architectural plan of the universe that neutralizes their evil and turns their own schemes against them. It is the ultimate triumph of infinite wisdom over finite malice. It isn't deception, it is strategic supremacy.
So by enforcing the methodology of context and refusing to reify the English translation of a word into a human emotion, the apparent contradiction dissolves entirely. It actually reinforces the criteria of justice and wisdom.
Exactly. Because the source finds no explicit, unresolvable texts in the Quran that breach the 7 logical bounds, it emerges from the external audit as the overwhelmingly strongest candidate.
But passing the external audit, merely proving that your concept of God matches what logic dictates God should be, is just getting your foot in the door.
It's step 1.
Right. If the Quran is the surviving candidate, it now has to endure a brutal internal audit. It can't just have a perfect theology. The book itself has to be structurally flawless.
This is the ultimate stress test. The text claims to be the literal, uncorrupted transmission from a perfect, all-knowing creator. Therefore, the text itself cannot contain a single internal contradiction. If it asserts that A is true on page 10 and then states that A is false on page 100, the claim of divine authorship instantly collapses. An all-knowing being does not make editorial errors.
The source material dives into how critics have spent centuries hunting for these contradictions. Let's explore one of the most famous ones mentioned, the mathematical critique regarding the creation of the universe.
Yes, this is a classic challenge. Critics analyze different verses across the text. In several places, the Quran explicitly states that the Creator formed the heavens and the earth in 6 days, or 6 periods of time. But then, critics point to a highly detailed passage in Surah Fussilat that breaks the creation process down sequentially.
Let's do the math on that specific passage.
The passage states that God created the earth in 2 days. Then he placed mountains upon it and measured out its sustenance in 4 days. And finally, he turned to the heaven and formed it into 7 heavens in 2 days.
So the critic pulls out a calculator. 2 days for the earth, plus 4 days for the sustenance, plus 2 days for the heavens. 2 plus 4 plus 2 equals 8. The text says 6 days in one chapter and 8 days in another. Boom. A fatal mathematical contradiction.
On the surface, to a lazy reader, it looks like an indefensible math error. But the expert analysis in the source breaks down the linguistic and contextual logic of the Arabic phrasing. You have to read the text with precision. It says, "He created the earth in 2 days and measured its sustenance in 4 days." The structural logic of the phrasing dictates that the 4 days of providing sustenance actually include the initial 2 days of creating the earth.
Let me test an analogy here.
Go for it.
Let's say I hire a contractor to build a house. I ask him how long it took. He says, I poured the concrete foundation in 2 weeks. I finished the entire structural frame, including the foundation, in 4 weeks. Then I spent 2 weeks putting on the roof. If I ask him for the total time, what is it?
It's 6 weeks.
Right. I don't add the 2 weeks for the foundation to the 4 weeks for the frame because the foundation is already part of the frame. It took 4 weeks for the structure plus 2 weeks for the roof. 6 weeks.
That is precisely the linguistic breakdown. The 4 days of measuring the Earth's sustenance represents the total time for the Earth's completion, which fundamentally encompasses the initial 2 days of its base creation. 4 days for the Earth plus 2 days for the heavens equals 6. It is a detailed elaboration of overlapping phases, not an arithmetic failure. The contradiction is an illusion born of poor reading comprehension.
That is a masterclass in reading context. Let's tackle another apparent contradiction, one that is highly charged and extremely relevant to modern geopolitics, the context of conflict.
This is a big one.
On one hand, you have one of the most famous verses in the Quran. There is no compulsion in religion. It is a profound foundational declaration of absolute freedom of conscience. But then critics inevitably point to other verses that command believers to kill the polytheists wherever you find them. How does the source possibly square a command of extreme military violence with a command of absolute tolerance?
Once again, the methodology demands that we shatter the bottle of reading out of context. If you take a pair of tweezers, extract the phrase, "kill the polytheists," isolate it from surrounding text, and treat it as a universal, timeless, philosophical command for how Muslims must treat their neighbors forever, then yes, it is a glaring, horrific contradiction to no compulsion.
So how does the internal audit resolve the friction?
By doing what any serious auditor does.
Yeah.
Reading the paragraph before and the paragraph after.
Such a simple concept. Right?
Exactly. The source meticulously details how the command to fight was explicitly directed at a specific historical group of polytheists in 7th century Arabia. This was a group that had violently broken mutual peace treaties, had actively tortured and persecuted the early believers, expelled them from their homes, and initiated a war of complete extermination against them.
So it isn't a theological stance. It's a specific military directive issued to an army standing on an active battlefield.
Exactly. The verse immediately preceding the famous sword verse explicitly exempts any polytheist group that had honored their treaties and had not aided the enemy. And the verse immediately following the command states, "But if they repent, establish prayer, and give zakah, let them go on their way." And another verse nearby says, "If anyone from the polytheists asks for your protection, grant it to them so they may hear the word of God, then escort them to a place of safety."
You don't escort someone to safety if your universal mandate is to kill them for their beliefs.
Precisely. The violence is entirely conditional on their active military aggression and treachery. The overarching, unbreakable rule remains no compulsion in religion, meaning you absolutely cannot force someone to accept faith with a sword, but you are commanded to pick up a sword and fight back if a hostile army is actively trying to slaughter your families. When you apply the rule of context, the contradiction vanishes entirely. It is a balance of absolute religious freedom and necessary self-defense.
Okay, so the text survives the internal logic tests, but there is one more hurdle before we can take it seriously. History.
Right, the historical transmission.
A text can be beautifully logical and perfectly consistent internally, but if it was rewritten, edited, translated, and manipulated 50 times over a span of 500 years by different kings and councils, how can we possibly trust that we are reading the original words? The source contrasts the historical transmission of the Quran with the prior texts.
And this is where the Quran presents a historically unique profile. The source emphasizes that the Quran possesses what it terms a zero-gap historical footprint.
Zero gap. What does that actually mean in the context of ancient manuscripts?
It means there is no dark period, no centuries-long game of telephone between the moment the text was spoken and the moment it was definitively recorded and standardized. Contrast this with the other texts. With the Torah, mainstream historical scholarship acknowledges a gap of centuries between the events described and the compilation of the oldest manuscripts we possess, during which the oral traditions were subject to the ravages of time, exile, and editing.
And the Gospels.
With the Gospels, you have a gap of several decades between the life of Jesus and the writing of the texts. They were written in Greek, a different language than the Aramaic Jesus actually spoke, largely by authors who were not direct eyewitnesses.
A historical gap is a breeding ground for myth, alteration, and the freezing of false bottles. How does the Quran avoid this?
The mechanism of preservation was dual and simultaneous. As the Quran was being spoken by the Prophet over a period of 23 years, it was instantly memorized verbatim by thousands of people in an oral culture designed for massive memorization. But it wasn't just oral. At the exact same time, it was being meticulously written down on physical materials, parchment, bone, leather, under the direct supervision of the Prophet himself.
So the oral and the written tracks were running parallel in real time.
Yes. And immediately upon his death, to prevent any fragmentation, the scattered written records were compiled into a single, official master volume, cross-checked against the memories of the thousands who knew it by heart. Within a few years, standardized copies of this master text were mass-produced and dispatched to all the major centers of the expanding civilization. The oral mass transmission and the immediate physical standardization acted as interlocking, foolproof safeguards.
So the historical audit presented by the source concludes that the text you can buy in a bookstore today is, with an incredibly high degree of historical certainty, the exact unaltered text that was spoken in the 7th century desert.
It survives the historical stress test without a scratch.
So where does this leave us? We have a text that passes the external rational thermometer of what the creator must be. It passes the internal test of possessing zero contradictions. It passes the historical test of pristine preservation. Does that mean the methodology stops here? Do we just turn off our critical faculties, declare victory, and blindly submit?
Absolutely not. To do that would violate the entire premise of our rational journey. Logic and history are necessary filters, but they don't answer the burning questions of the human heart. This is where the source introduces one of its most brilliant, final methodological twists, moving us into the realm of the human condition.
I love this part. The author calls it the temporary hypothesis of divinity. Explain how this works, because it sounds like a science experiment.
It essentially is the scientific method applied to theology. The author says, okay, the text has survived the gauntlet. It is the strongest, most mathematically sound candidate. But you, as a free-thinking individual, still do not have to blindly believe it is divine magic. Instead, we are going to treat the text exactly like a scientist treats a highly plausible, rigorous theory. We formulate the temporary hypothesis.
We mentally assume it is true, just for the sake of a thought experiment.
Exactly. We put on the lens of the text and we ask a crucial question. If this book is truly the operational blueprint provided by the actual creator of the universe, then it must contain profound, coherent answers that actually solve the mystery of the human condition.
Right.
If its answers are shallow or if they clash with observable reality, the hypothesis fails. But if the answers profoundly illuminate our existence, the hypothesis gains massive, undeniable, rational weight.
So we are testing the existential answers. Let's walk through the big three. The questions every listener has stared at the ceiling at 2 a.m. and agonized over. Starting with the most basic. What is our origin? How did we get here?
We are all intimately familiar with the Darwinian biological narrative. But when we test the Quran's answer under our hypothesis, it is fascinatingly coherent. It does not present a mythological, magical, instant materialization of a fully formed human out of thin air, like a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat. The text traces a logical, non-contradictory progression of development. It states that humanity originated from an extract of clay, meaning we are composed of the fundamental base elements of the earth: carbon, water, minerals.
We are made of the dirt we walk on. That aligns perfectly with biology.
Then it moves specifically into human reproduction, outlining distinct biological phases. It starts as a drop of fluid, which becomes an aliqua, a clinging clot, perfectly describing an embryo attaching to the uterine wall, which becomes a muga, a chewed-like lump, describing the somite stage of development. Then bones form, then flesh clothes the bones, and finally a new creation emerges.
Breathing in of consciousness. The soul.
Right. It provides an origin narrative that fully respects the physical, biological stages of development while simultaneously anchoring them in a deliberate, divine architectural process. It bridges the material science and the metaphysical meaning flawlessly.
Okay, so that explains how we arrived on the stage, but it raises a bigger question. What makes us special? If we are just biology made of Earth, why are humans the ones building particle accelerators, recording deep dives, and agonizing over philosophy, while every other animal is just focused on eating and surviving?
The hypothesis reveals that humans were endowed with a specific, unique operating system. The text declares that God taught Adam the names of all things. This isn't just a story about a guy learning a vocabulary list. It signifies the immense capacity for language, for conceptual, symbolic thought.
The ability to put water in bottles. We can think about things that aren't physically in front of us. We can conceptualize abstract mathematics or the concept of tomorrow or the ideal of justice. A lion only thinks about the gazelle in front of it.
Exactly. And inextricably linked to that symbolic thought is the terrifying burden of free will. We are not driven solely by biological instinct. We possess the unique, staggering capacity to choose to disobey our own programming. We can choose to starve ourselves for a political cause. We can choose to forgive an enemy. That cognitive freedom is what separates us from the rest of the cosmos.
Which naturally leads to the heaviest question of all.
Yeah.
Why are we here? What is the point of this 80-year struggle on this floating rock?
The hypothesis provides a definitive answer. We are here to engage in voluntary worship. But be very careful here. The text aggressively redefines the word worship. It breaks the traditional model we are used to.
Right, because if I hear worship, my brain immediately defaults to people singing songs to a deity who demands praise to stroke his own cosmic ego.
Which, we already established via the thermometer, logically cannot be true. The first cause is self-sufficient. God does not need human prayers. If every human stopped praying tomorrow, it wouldn't diminish the Creator by an atom's weight. Therefore, the text redefines worship not as a transaction to fulfill God's need, but as a technological system for human moral and spiritual evolution.
Okay, so how does that work?
Prayer, giving charity, fasting, acting with rigorous justice. These are mechanisms designed to elevate human consciousness, to tame the destructive ego, and to align our chaotic free will with the unified harmony of the universe.
We don't worship to fix God. We worship to fix ourselves.
Precisely. It is a spiritual gym designed to build your moral musculature.
Okay, but if I'm listening to this, a massive objection just popped into my head. Let me push back.
Go ahead.
If God is all-powerful, and the whole point is for us to be good, moral beings, why go through this convoluted 80-year testing phase? Why allow all this horrific chaos, evil, doubt, and suffering? Why not just hardwire us all from birth to be perfectly good, peaceful believers?
That is the ultimate question of the human condition, the problem of evil and free will. And the text pulls the answer directly from its logical framework. Forced belief, or hardwired goodness, has absolutely zero logical or moral value.
It's like building a robot, programming it to say, I love you, and then feeling good about yourself when it says it. It's completely hollow. It means nothing because the robot had no choice.
That is exactly it. If you are hardwired to be good, you aren't actually good. You are just a machine flawlessly executing a script. The universe, according to the text, is explicitly designed as a test ground. The struggles, the doubts, the temptations, the presence of evil, these are not accidents. They are the necessary friction required to generate genuine moral choices.
Free will only means something if you have the option to choose the wrong thing. Free will exists to separate the choices.
Yes. The struggle separates those who willfully choose to align with truth and justice from those who choose selfishness and oppression. And because the choices are fiercely authentic, the ultimate consequence, the reward or the punishment in the next life, becomes a matter of earned justice, not an arbitrary, meaningless gift. You are handed the canvas and the paints, but you have to strive to paint the masterpiece yourself.
Under our temporary hypothesis, that answer gives profound, staggering meaning to human suffering and daily effort. It isn't random cruelty. It is the necessary high-stakes environment for the soul to prove its worth.
It passes the test of the human condition. It completely illuminates our reality.
This has been an incredibly deep theological and philosophical journey. But I want to pull this down from the cosmos and land it squarely in the real world before we finish. Because this methodology, breaking bottles, analyzing context, finding the source clean, it isn't just for abstract debates about the nature of the divine. It fundamentally alters how we view daily life, politics, and society.
The source material contains a really powerful appendix that applies this bottle theory to two highly misunderstood, politically charged concepts within Islam. It demonstrates the real-world damage that occurs when we let history freeze a concept and the liberation that happens when we break that bottle and return to the pure text.
The first concept is shura, commonly translated as consultation. Let's examine the bottle this word was historically trapped in.
For centuries, under various empires, shura was frozen as a relatively minor, non-binding advisory concept. Picture a medieval caliph or king sitting on a throne. He wants to raise taxes or go to war, so he convenes a few of his elite scholars and advisors and asks, "What do you think?" They give their advice. But the king retains absolute authority. He can completely ignore their advice and do whatever he wants. That was the historical bottle for Shura. It was a toothless tool used to legitimize the absolute power of autocrats.
The rubber stamp.
Exactly.
But what happens when we smash that medieval bottle and go back to the source code, to the Quran itself?
The text reveals something politically revolutionary. In the Quran, Shura isn't a casual suggestion for kings. It is mentioned in the exact same breath, with the exact same structural moral weight as establishing the daily 5 prayers. The verse describes the believers as those who respond to their Lord and establish prayer, and whose affair is determined by consultation among themselves.
It isn't a suggestion. It's a massive, binding societal operating system.
Yes. It is presented as a core pillar of a functioning society. It was never meant to be an elite advisory board. It was intended to be a binding mechanism where the affairs of the community are decided by the community. When you strip away the monarchical context and look at the pure linguistic intent, Shura aligns perfectly with and even demands modern concepts of participatory governance, strict checks and balances, and collective democratic decision-making.
We let power-hungry kings freeze the concept to protect their thrones, and the world forgot that the actual water inside the bottle was radical civic participation. That completely changes how you view political structures in that part of the world.
And the second example the text gives is even more explosive, perhaps the most misunderstood word on the planet, the jihad bottle.
There is probably no word more encrusted with toxic, terrifying associations today than jihad. The bottle it is currently trapped in, weaponized by violent extremists who claim it, and sensationalized by media who fear it, is entirely reified into one meaning: armed, aggressive combat, holy war, terrorism.
But the author shatters this terrifying bottle using the pure methodology of the text. If you bypass the historical baggage and go to the linguistic root of the word in Arabic, jihada, it has absolutely nothing to do with swords. It simply means exerting utmost effort. It is an intense struggle to achieve a difficult goal.
So what was the original water poured into that bottle?
The text demonstrates that in the earliest periods of Islam, when Muslims were a severely persecuted pacifist minority in Mecca, the Quran commanded them to strive against them with it, meaning the Quran, a great striving, or jihad, meaning use arguments, use rational proof, use intellectual and cognitive struggle to persuade people. It was entirely a battle of ideas.
It was an intellectual mandate. It wasn't about violence at all initially.
Not even slightly. Only much later, when they were expelled from their homes and facing extermination, did the concept expand to include a strictly regulated defensive military component to fight off oppression. But the core essence of the word remains unchanged, exerting immense effort for good.
So if we apply this broken bottle methodology today, what does actual jihad look like in the 21st century?
The modern jihad, as the source points out, is largely technological, diplomatic, and intellectual. It is the medical researcher staying awake in a lab at 3 a.m., exerting utmost effort to find a cure for cancer. It is the social activist struggling tirelessly against systemic poverty in their city. It is the diplomat fighting through exhaustion to forge a just peace treaty between warring nations. When you break the frozen, hijacked bottle of holy war, you recover a dynamic, lifelong, beautiful imperative to exert maximum effort to heal and improve the world.
That completely flips the script. It proves exactly how dangerous epistemological forgetting truly is. When we forget the origin of a word and blindly accept the most aggressive, weaponized definition handed to us by history, we don't just lose a word, we lose profound, world-changing wisdom.
Which brings our entire journey full circle.
It really does. Let's take a breath and summarize the incredible ground we've covered today. We started by diagnosing ourselves with bottle sickness, recognizing that the words, concepts, and traditions we rely on are often just cages that distort reality. We then realized we needed a neutral measuring stick, so we established pure reason and the logic of the first cause as our objective thermometer.
Armed with that thermometer, we acted as impartial auditors, testing the major historical texts. We found that the Quran, according to the strict methodology of the source, survived the external logical audit of perfection and justice, maintained flawless internal consistency, and possessed a uniquely uncorrupted historical footprint.
But we didn't stop at cold logic. We formulated a temporary hypothesis to see if the text actually worked in the messy reality of human life. And we found it provided profound, coherent answers to our deepest existential questions, tracing our origins, explaining the terrifying gift of free will, and redefining our purpose as moral evolution. Finally, we saw how applying this methodology, relentlessly breaking the bottles, can resurrect hijacked concepts like shura and jihad, turning them from medieval relics into dynamic tools for modern progress.
It is a rigorous, demanding, and ultimately liberating framework for approaching existence.
Yeah.
It absolutely does not ask for your blind faith. It demands your relentless intellectual honesty.
And that leads me to a final provocative thought I want to leave you with. If we're listening to this right now, we've talked a lot today about the prison of tools. We've analyzed how our language, our history, and our technology are all thick lenses that distort our view of the absolute truth. We've talked about the courage required to break the glass bottles of tradition and misunderstanding. But I want you to think about the closest, most intimate tool of all. What about your own ego?
That's a huge one.
Think about it. Is your intense desire to be right, your need to win the argument, your fear of admitting you might have been wrong, is that the final, thickest glass bottle keeping you from seeing the water? The next time you find yourself fiercely defending a belief, whether it's a political stance, a religious dogma, or just a personal grudge pause, take a breath. Ask yourself, am I actually defending the objective truth, or am I just deeply emotionally attached to the shape of the bottle I was handed when I was a child?
That is the ultimate daily test of critical humility.
Keep questioning everything. Keep looking for the water. Keep breaking those bottles. And always remember, the map is not the territory. Thanks for diving deep with us.